100,000 subscribers is such a crazy milestone. To a lot of my friends and viewers, this seemed like something they all saw coming, but for me, I had no idea. Now, I'm not down on my channel or anything, but I guess I just never would have expected this. Me starting a YouTube channel that would one day have over 100,000 subscribers? It's quite a thing. So what got me interested in YouTube in the first place? Well, when I was 17, Barry, stop. Look, Barry, I love your story videos, but enough of this broken timeline stuff. Tell us your life story, at least as it's been so far. I didn't know you'd actually be into that. Well, okay, but I do have to warn you. It's not the happiest story all the way through. Nobody's life is perfect, and I'm not going to pretend that I had the hardest life ever, but there are a few bumps in there. Also, I need to give a huge thank you to Laika for the artwork that you're seeing in this video. With that said, sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy my story. The year was 1994, and my mother and father had been married for a few months now. They weren't particularly worried about having a child, but they knew they wanted kids at some point. Well, one day, my mother awoke to morning sickness, and for a few weeks, was absolutely sure that she was going to have a baby. But alas, her happy accident turned out to be not so great. My mother unfortunately had a miscarriage, which expectedly made her very sad, but also very ready to have a baby. I was born January 9th, 1995, and as unfortunate as the situation was, if her first child had not been a miscarriage, I would have never existed. About a year after my birth, my family moved to Kansas. I was 2 years old and I was walking around the trailer that my family lived in. My father was sitting on the couch in his underwear on the phone with his twin brother. I stood up and walked over to him. From the way my father tells this story, I seemed confused. I tilted my head to the side as he spoke on the phone. He patted me on the back and told me to go play. A few minutes later, I walked back up to him and stared at him again. "Go on, buddy," my father said playfully. "Go play with your toys." Another few minutes later, I walked back up to my almost naked father and simply stared at him. He looks at me and says, "Okay, Barry, tell Daddy what's wrong." Upon him saying this, I poked him as hard as I could in the groin. He grabs himself and moans a bit, and apparently I screamed out, "You pooped!" Now, I don't recall doing that, but this is one of his favorite stories to tell. We spent a few months in Kansas when my mother became pregnant again. They decided it was time to move back to Oregon to have the child. That's when my brother David was born. He was a much larger baby than I was, but then again, it is in his nature to be huge. We moved into any place we could get our hands on. See, my family was always very poor. I was always very familiar with mold, but we did the best we could. Fast forward, and I'm 5 years old. We move into a place out in the country. A beautiful creek behind the house, 2 very large fields, a vast yard to play in. It was great. The house was kind of falling apart, but it was home. After moving it all the way, we decided it was time to get a pet. I wanted a cat. Actually, I think we all did. We looked around for a while at the Humane Society when we saw Sheridan. He was all black except for a small white patch on his neck. He was rubbing himself up against the cage, and he was so happy and young. I looked at my mother and said, "I want that one." We asked our landlord what he thought about getting a cat, being as how we live so close to bears and raccoons and mountain lions. Our landlord told us that in the 80 years that he'd been alive, not a single cat survived that house. Despite that, we brought him home, and man do I have stories about that cat. Him climbing up trees to bring full nests of birds down, him chasing and fighting with raccoons, keeping them off the property, and my 3-year-old brother sticking his finger up Sheridan's butt. He's just been a very good cat. All my friends tell me that he's going to outlive me and curl up on my grave after I pass. And I know what you're thinking, he's just a cat, but I've had him since I was 5. Speaking of, that's the age that I got my first console. My parents got us a GameCube, and Super Mario Sunshine was the first video game we ever played. I remember being so afraid of some of the enemies that I would force my father to beat the level for me. But I wasn't one of those kids who stayed inside all the time. My father was heavily against that. David and I were outside pretty much every day, all day. And with so much space, we could do anything we wanted. This was the start of my older brother bully period. I'd pick up a stick and hit David with it, and then he'd pick up a stick, and we'd pretty much hurt each other as badly as we could. I remember snowball fights were not normal. The idea was, whoever cried first lost, and we would try hard, especially me, to make the other cry. We didn't hate each other, but we just grew up aggressive. Dev and I would get into fights a lot. Despite our hostile antics, though, we really loved being outside, especially in the snow. I remember this one time, we took some inner tubes and rode them down some pretty large hills. My aunt and her kids came along as well as a family friend. He had this huge yellow lab named Remington. I loved that name and that dog. He was built like a truck and he could run down the hill faster than we could slide down on the inner tubes. Well, my cousin Sydney and her friend Rachel grabbed the inner tube and started to ride down together, when Remington flew down the hill, jumped right on top of them, and would not get off until they came to a stop at the bottom. They were screaming the entire way down, and I couldn't imagine why. I thought it looked kind of fun, until I heard Sydney screaming from the bottom of the hill that Remington had been humping them the whole way down. She never forgave that dog for that. Now, all of that happened from the span that I was 5 to 6. When I was 6 years old, my father started building up bonfires. Being as how we had a lot of property and almost no neighbors, we could do it any time of the year. Except, the neighbors we did have were kinda killjoys. Every time fire season ended, we would get called on for burning. Now, yes, this is illegal, but we were always responsible. We had a water hose close by, we had a pit dug, and we always had someone watching the fire, but it never stopped them from coming. Every year, my father would deliberately pick a day that he knew was not a burn day and burn anyway. And each year we would get a pink slip, a warning, and my dad liked to collect them. It was so frequent that the firefighters would drive up to the house and say, "Hey Bob, you know it's not a burn day, right?" To which he'd reply, "Yeah, where's my pink slip?" They'd write it out and before leaving say, "All right Bob, see you next year." They were always really cool about it, and again, we were always responsible. Well, most of us. One of the days we had a fire going, my brother decided to light the tip of a stick on fire. He was waving it around in the wind, watching the smoke fly off and blow away. For whatever reason, as he was following me with the stick in his hand, he poked me in the back of the neck and held it there. It wasn't out of malice either, it was literally him having no idea how dumb it was to do that. He got grounded, I got a scar. Moving on a bit, I turned 7. We still spend most of our time outside, and one of our favorite things to do is run turkeys out of our fields. See, the 2 large fields were always seeded in the spring, and turkeys would go out there and peck them away. Well, one day, David and I were out when we saw a huge flock. I started running to the larger ones, and David started chasing the babies. We did this for a few moments when I heard David start to scream. I turned around to see what was wrong when I saw the largest turkey I'd ever seen in my entire life chasing my brother. Apparently, it was not happy that he was after its chicks, and it was honestly trying to run my brother down. I ran for the thing just as David made it inside the house. It turned, saw me, and I sprinted towards our large trampoline. After I climbed up there, it and all the other turkeys took off. David and I started laughing about how huge that turkey was, and thereafter named it Turkeyzilla. We never saw it again. This next part is going to get a bit sad, and was actually a repressed memory until recently. We had shared him for 2 years now, and he had been a great cat. One day, a stray cat wandered onto our property. It had obviously not eaten in a while as it was very skinny, but it had a decently healthy coat and it was really friendly. Sheridan got along with him okay, and I was hoping that we could keep him, and perhaps nurse him back to health. But my father hated the idea. The cat had worms and probably didn't have shots. Could have given our cat and our family an awful disease, and he just wanted it gone. However, the cat did not leave, so my father shot it. He killed it. Unbeknownst to him, though, my brother and I were watching from our bedroom window. It was the first time that I'd ever seen anything die, and it was by my father's hand. I always loved animals, and that really scarred me. Don't get me wrong, my father isn't a hateful man, but we'll get to him a bit later. For now, let's talk pets. A few months had gone by, and I'd forgotten about the entire incident. Kids are resilient, it's adults that are fragile. I wake up at about 8 in the morning to my brother telling me that Mom and Dad bought a dog. I didn't believe him, and I just rolled over. I wake up a few hours later, and sure enough, a new yellow lab puppy was sitting in our living room. Remember Remington? Well, apparently that big old boy had a litter with another big beautiful lab. Our friends gave the puppy to us no charge, which was an amazing gift. I sat down to greet her and she licked my face. She was so adorable. Her skin was all scrunched up over her eyes. I just loved her instantly. "What are we gonna name her?" I asked, looking to my father. "We were thinking Cherish," he said. Back then, I had no idea what Cherish meant, but looking back, it was the perfect name for her. She loved David and I, followed us wherever we went. We had this sandbox in our yard, and David and I would bury each other as Cherish would cry and dig us up. She grew to a year old and became a beautiful dog, and so well behaved. One day we actually bought this new bone for her to chew on, and when I gave it to her, she took it across the yard and then came back and let me pet her. She looked at me as though she was thanking me, as though I'd given her an amazing gift and she was so grateful. She'd walk over and gnaw on the bone for a bit and then walk up back to me and thank me again. Now I know that sounds strange, but I don't know what else she could have been doing. We took her everywhere, camping, fishing, you name it, until one day, David and I were playing on our GameCube. I remember the game so vividly. We were playing Looney Tunes Back in Action. We had this game we'd play where we'd take a character, hide him in the level, then switch characters and the other person would have to find our other character. We'd always make games up like that. My mother burst into our room and asked, "Have you seen Cherish?" She said it in such a hurried tone. She was putting her jacket on when I said, "No, I haven't seen her." She rushes out the door and David and I continue playing. We had no idea what was going on, but we were hoping for the best. A few hours later, my mother came home crying. She came into our room and told us that Cherish was dead. See, Cherish had this awful habit of walking up onto the road and down the street. She hadn't done it in months, but all of a sudden she just took off. A car had hit her and kept going. They didn't stop to see if she was okay, they just left her. We assumed she kept walking down the road for a bit afterwards and then she'd passed away in a ditch. A couple had spotted the dog and called the number on the collar to let us know. I cried for 3 days. It was the second time that I'd ever experienced death, and it hit me a lot harder. A few weeks passed and my father bought us a new puppy. He was heartbroken too, but he was just so sad to see us upset all the time. He picked out another yellow lab, and on the drive home he named her Fawn. He said it was because she was so calm and young and mellow. The second that truck door opened, though, the dog was zipping across the yard. She was so happy and energetic, and just like that, we were happy again. Of course we missed Cherish, but the hole got smaller. Let's talk about my father for a bit. My father is an alcoholic, and at the time, it was pretty bad. See, he had fallen off a bridge and broken his back, and he used alcohol to feel better. At least, that's how he justified it. Now, I don't have any issue with liquor, but my dad was the guy who always had a beer in his hand. He could fall asleep and never spill a full beer as he held on to the can all night. Thing was, I never really knew him sober. I mean, I knew the difference and I liked him better sober, but it was more rare to see him sober than drunk. He would come home, open a beer, and then watch sports. If we tried to talk to him or were loud, he'd yell at us to go outside. And the thing was, this could be at any time. See, he was impaired by alcohol. I vividly remember my father kicking David and I out of the house multiple times when it was the middle of winter. He'd tell us to stay out there for hours, and we'd always hope Mom was doing laundry so we could sit next to the side of the house where the warm air from the drying machine would escape. We'd huddle up next to that thing to stay as warm as we possibly could, and the thing was, we never thought that this was strange. It wasn't until a couple years ago I told my friend Alec that story, and he looked at me and said, "Barry, that's not right." I mean, how was I to know? The final straw, however, was when I was 8. We were watching TV and I had rolled over the remote by accident. This changed the channel, and my father punched me in the back. I got the wind knocked out of me, and I was hurt, but I always assumed that if I got spanked or hit, that I was in the wrong. My mother flipped out though and told my father that if he'd ever done that again, she would leave and take us too. He kinda slowed down on the drinking for a while after that, and he never did get physically abusive ever again. Verbally abusive, however, that was kind of his norm. Yelling at Mom almost every night, freaking out about the smallest things, and then this reoccurring memory. I have this memory, almost a dream, waking up in my father's truck, or even him waking David and myself up and driving us somewhere in the middle of the night. I remember the blankets that he would put over us, and I remember the streetlights lighting them up as we drove. See, my mother worked graveyard, so if my father was leaving in the middle of the night, he would have had to take us with him. We would get to a house and he'd put us to sleep on the couch, as far as I recall, and then, when I woke up the next morning, I'd be in my bed. This would happen very often, and I never questioned it. I mean, God, I was probably 6 years old and it felt so much like a dream I just didn't worry about it. It wasn't until I was telling this to my mother and brother years later when David told me that he remembered that as well. I tried asking my father what was going on and why he did this, but he's been through so many years of alcohol and painkillers that he doesn't remember it at all. All he ever says is, "Well, I was probably cheating on your mother." Which, in hindsight, makes the most sense. Now, before I continue, I do have to say that my father's not the worst guy out there, but because of how he was raised, he grew up kinda messed up. All of our family on his side did, and after hearing the stories, I can see why he thinks the way he does. Is that an excuse? Well, yeah, but your childhood shapes you. It does for all of us. I'm just glad I wasn't raised like he was. I may tell some more stories about him in future Barry stories, but let's continue. Let's talk school. When I was 5, I went into elementary school. Pretty normal. But I was never the kid who tried very hard. I was always there for the social aspect, and class was always the boring part. I just never had a thirst for knowledge, no desire to learn. And I'm not talking about kindergarten, but all of elementary school. I did okay because my parents wanted me to and forced me to, but I only did enough to get by. It was always an obligation to me, which kinda sucks because learning should be fun. If you don't remember, I told a nightmare story about a girl named Sophie. That girl actually exists, and it wasn't until high school that I met her. She always had a book every day, and she loved learning, and honestly, she was one of the people that made me realize that I loved learning too. I developed a thirst for it almost because of her, but I can't let her take all the credit. Also, I'm getting ahead of myself. Rewind back to elementary school real quick. We lived next to this guy named Greg. This guy was a brainiac, and everyone loved talking with him because he always had so many interesting things to say. He knew so much, and if you ever asked him a question that he didn't know, he would go out and find a way to learn about it and get back to you. And this was before everyone had internet, so he would actually go out and look for the information. This guy would record the news on VHS. He had tapes and tapes of History Channel episodes, and books filled his house. Every week, Greg would give my brother and I a word and tell us to use it out in public until we figured out what it meant. Once we did, he would give us another word. Initiative is the one that I recall the best as it was the hardest one for me to comprehend, but I feel like Greg made me interested in learning more so than any of my other teachers did. He kickstarted my craving to be more intelligent, and it had its benefits for everyone, even him. This man smoked for 30 years, and one day we were sitting around the fire. He opened up a brand new box of cigarettes and pulls one out. He smokes it until it reaches its end, and he throws the butt in the fire. He points to it and says, "That was my last cigarette." My father, my brother, and myself all looked up to him confused. "You're quitting?" my father asked. "When did you decide that?" "Just now," Greg replied. "I know they're not good for me, and it's just time to stop." "Well, are you gonna get gum or patches or anything, Greg?" I asked. "Nah, I'll be fine." His confidence was astonishing. Months went by, and we never saw him with a cigarette. One day, I asked him how he did it. "How did you put them down like that? Aren't cigarettes addictive?" "Yeah, they are, Barry, but it's mind over matter. I'm smarter than my body. I wanted to quit, so I did, and to be honest, it was the easiest thing that I've ever done." Those words inspired me. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be intelligent, to be able to have such a strong mind and will. At the time, I didn't realize how important that encounter was, but it helped me in such a large way. I wanted nothing more than to be smart, like Greg. Let's go ahead and move on to middle school. Wait, Barry, 1 second. Look, I don't mean to derail the story here, but what about religious background? I know you've said you never want to talk about beliefs so as not to sway anyone, but this could be a huge part of your life, right? Actually, yeah, you're right. I was born into a Jehovah's Witness family. My father was in the religion since he was a young boy and my mother when she was a little girl. In 1993, my father stopped going but still believed everything they ever taught him and had us go to meetings with Mom. Going to meeting is the equivalent of saying I'm going to church, and in the Jehovah's Witness congregation, you don't actually call the building church, it's a kingdom hall, which sounds a lot cooler to be honest. I grew up learning the Bible along with a lot of my family and friends, and as religion does, it ran parts of my life. I never saluted the flag, I would always leave the room when Christmas and or other holiday songs were sang, and I wouldn't participate in school events that had anything to do with patriotism or holidays. It was always kind of awkward, but all of my friends understood, and I even talked to anyone who was curious about it. Even though at the time, I didn't know that much either. We'll get back to the religious part later in the story though, because I don't want to break up the timeline too bad. Let's move back on to middle school. Everyone always warned me that middle school would suck. All of your friends change, everyone gets all edgy and thinks they're cool, or at the very least, wants to be. You lose your old friends and find new ones, and to an extent, this was very true. The first week of middle school, my best and closest friend screamed at me. She told me that she was tired of my crap, which really hurt me. I didn't actually talk with her again until junior year of high school. I thought she hated me. I got a few new friends that I'd hang out with, one of them almost daily. His name was Eric. Cool guy, but kind of a prick. Again, everyone was trying to figure out who they were, which is not a good time of your life. Me, I didn't change though. I was still the shortest kid in school, still had the highest pitched voice. I'd gone through puberty, but I just wasn't worried about the edgy teen bullcrap. I just wanted to have fun and ignore school like I'd been doing, but even that changed. For some reason, I started trying. I was known as the smart kid in class, and even better, it seemed like all the girls liked me. Even 8th graders all had crushes on me. I'd go through the hallways and at least one 8th grade girl that I've never met would tell me she loved me and would ask me out. I called it icky back then, but I remember it fondly now. Actually, I have proof of this too. My middle school yearbooks are hysterical. Funnily enough, in 8th grade, I even won Most Likely to Be Famous. Moving forward in time, I'm 13 years old. We had a field trip. My buddy Willie was so close to not passing his class, which would have stopped him from going. I helped him in world geography to get his grade up to a D+, which was just enough to let him go on the field trip. It made me happy. We went bowling and had such a great day. Willie got me one of those fake punk bracelets out of the quarter machine to show his appreciation for the help. I don't really remember bowling at all, though. I think we stayed in the arcade room, which was much more fun anyway. We get back to school and my mother is waiting for me out front. This never happened. I thought this was the best day ever. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She just kind of forced a smile at me, but it didn't feel right. That's when my brother rolled down the window in the back seat and said, "We're moving." Moving? I was kind of taken back. I was going to say wow or cool, but I never got the chance. Before I could open my mouth, David then said, "But Dad isn't coming with us." I knew exactly what was happening. My parents fought every night. They would stay up screaming at each other as I laid in bed curled up, whispering to myself that they'd be alright. Every night when they'd start to argue, I'd whisper no to myself and squeeze my eyes closed. I didn't mind that they fought, I just didn't want them to be so unhappy all the time. So when David said that, it kind of broke me. I was crying all the way to our new place, which was really close to the school I was attending. I cried all night and missed a few days of school because of it. When I called my father, he told me that it may be for the best, which definitely didn't help, but he was never that great with words. For a little while, it affected me, and David too. I would fight with him more than I ever had before. He and I would almost get to the point of punching each other, but we'd scream and wrestle each other to the ground. It was always how we played, but this was different. Mom put me in the guest bedroom in hopes that it would help, but it really didn't. He and I got anger counseling at school during my math class, which was such a win for me and really did help. My friends, however, would ask where I went during math class, being as how they always pulled me out of the room 10 minutes in, and I never told them. I was so ashamed that I was in counseling class. I was better than that. It just felt so weird, so I always deflected. The only real problem from that point on was the occasional bully. See, all my life I was the shortest kid. I was strong and wiry, but I would never hurt anyone. People saw that and wanted to take advantage of it. They mostly did it because people liked me and I was honestly so innocent looking. I would run from bullies for a time, but after a while I realized public humiliation was such a stronger deterrent. I would pick out the kids who would try to rough me up and I'd make them look like idiots in the middle of class, only on days that they'd picked on me. They learned real quick to leave me alone. I'd say innocent jokes in science class when we were talking about the brain, like, if you gave a random guy another half of a brain, he'd potentially be smarter, but if you gave Anthony half a brain, he'd be normal. The teacher would join in with laughter as Anthony would be stewing, but people would pick on him for the rest of the day, and nobody bothered me. I was smarter than them, quicker. I could hurt them deeper than they could me, and I know that sounds silly, but I swear to God it's a superpower. When I saw someone getting picked on, I was always there to make the guy doing it look like a fool, and I didn't realize it, but this further drove my thirst for knowledge. High school rolls around and I still did this, but I didn't have to do it as often. Being that I started at the beginning of the year, people found out really fast that they didn't like to be laughed at. I think it was my history class. My teacher gave me a ton of history books to pass out, and this kid made a dumb joke. "Hey Barry, are those heavy?" "Not really," I looked back kind of confused. "Well then why are you flexing so much?" He chuckled about it as though it was a funny joke when I said, "Oh, I don't know. Why does my chest move in and out? Breathing? Why do I propel forward when I walk? Legs moving? Are you an idiot?" The whole class laughed. Not because my reply was actually funny, but because this guy was a senior and they didn't expect me to do that. He kind of slumped down in his chair, mouth open, and he looked down at his desk. To be honest, I don't think I ever had to do that ever again. Really, it wasn't much either. It wasn't an outstanding joke, but the fact that I stood up to these douches made them back off. Anyway, I finished my freshman year and I'm still the smallest kid, squeaky voice, and look like a 7th grader. The next year rolls around and things changed. It was sophomore year and nobody recognized me at all. Instead of 4'8", I was now as tall as everybody else. My face matured a bit and my voice was deeper than practically everyone else's. I never went through that whole voice crack period either. All of a sudden, it just deepened, which freaked people out. They used to mock my voice, but here I was sounding like Johnny Cash, and they had the weak little voices now. It felt really cool. I went through high school hanging with the same 3 friends almost every day, Nick, Gage, and Logan. Out of all of them though, I knew everybody, or at least, they all knew me. It was at least 3 times a week someone would walk up to me and say, "Hey Barry, oh my god, it's been so long, how are you?" We'd have a conversation and then they'd take off and I'd look to my friends and ask, "Do you guys know who the hell that was?" They'd all shake their heads and we'd walk on. Gage would always make a joke like, "Haha, Barry, you're just so popular." And I'd always reply with, "No, not popular, well known." I never liked the way popular sounded. It always seemed to mean the popular crowd, and I never wanted to be associated with that. Junior year was more the same as sophomore year with some harder classes, but it was senior year when I did the most. One of my teachers, by the name of Miss Campbell, talked me into doing a play. I was one of her favorite students, but I never really thought I would get involved in that stuff. I'm so glad I did though. I never wanted to be an actor so badly. Seeing the crowd singing and acting on stage, people cheering for you. It's such a rush, and the backstage aspect is something everybody should experience. I remember this one guy would never put on his stage makeup. It just made him uncomfortable. Well, he got into a fight with another guy backstage about it, and they were screaming at each other in the dressing room. I ran in there to see what was going on when Jacob looks at me and says, "Can you tell Josh to be a man and put his makeup on?" I lost it. After doing 2 plays during the year, I went back to just schoolwork and friends. There are so many stories from high school and the plays alone that I'll just have to get to them another time. Now, Nick was always my best friend in high school. We thought the same way and we just clicked a lot better. I liked Gage and Logan, but I hung out with Nick a lot more. Well, Nick had a 3rd generation iPod Touch, and one day he brought it to school. He showed me Call of Duty Zombies playing on it, and I cannot tell you how badly I wanted the game. I begged my mother to buy me an iPod Touch, which surprisingly worked. See, we were in a rougher financial situation than we were before, being as how we no longer had any of Dad's money. As a matter of fact, he kinda wasn't making any money at all. He was in prison at the time. He'd been driving drunk and he got arrested. This was his 4th DUI, so they sentenced him to a year in prison. Actually, I think it was 6 months, and then he got in trouble with a gang and he got into a fight with a few of them and got 6 more months. Regardless, my mother told my brother and I that she wanted us to have something nice but could only do this once, and not again for a long time. We agreed and she got us the iPod Touches. I feel kinda bad for having her do that now that I look back on it, but man was it fun. Nick and I would play Call of Duty Zombies together and I loved gaming on that thing. Technology was moving forward so fast and it really intrigued me. I became a computer guy, but still loved my Xbox more. I only fixed household computers. I didn't even know what a graphics card was or that it even existed. Nick would invite me over to play games on his computer. He'd play Civilization 4 and Battlefield 1942, and I'd yell at him, "Dude, our iPod Touches plays Call of Duty and looks better than that. PC gaming just doesn't have the graphics that Xbox has." Yeah, I was a severe console prick. I'll get back to that later though. It was time to make money. I found people around the neighborhood who needed help. A neighbor across the street always had me mow her lawn or clean her computer, same with another down the road, but there was this one guy who further helped me with my drive for intellect. His name was Michael, and he was a musician. I first started helping him with mowing and weeding his lawn, but soon became really good friends with him. And I loved going over to his house. He had so much wisdom to give, and he knew I listened. He would tell me that I was smart, and he could see that I had passion in my heart. Told me that my mind would take me where my muscles could not, and if I really wanted to be an actor, which at the time was my dream, I needed to put my mind to it. I worked for him throughout the school year and years after I graduated as well. Through all of it, he always had some friendly advice. He always spoke so softly and made me feel like he really believed in me, which was always super nice. I decided I wanted to get into acting, but I couldn't afford lessons. I needed to train myself to act, to get better under heavy, sad, or harsh situations. So, I made a YouTube channel. It was called B.A. Weedrick, and I posted a video series called Watching You. There were also story videos on there because I always loved telling stories. The series was about a group of people dressed in all black stalking the protagonist, me. I would be curious to find out what they wanted and why they were stalking me, and they would try to scare me off. But as I was still in high school at this point in the story, the series was going well and there was a good 30 people watching it and waiting to see the story unfold. Granted, they were all my friends, but whatever. Time went on and I wanted to do more things outside. I started researching airsoft guns because for some reason I loved watching airsoft videos. My buddy Nick had a Colt 1911 airsoft pistol, so I decided to buy myself an airsoft pistol as well. I went with the Smith & Wesson M4505. It was the most powerful spring pistol at the time, and it almost looked real, which I loved. He and I would run around doing airsoft in the parks and empty schoolyards at our houses, and we loved it. I'd be climbing over things and sneaking up behind people without them knowing. My favorite game at the time was Splinter Cell, so I'd try to act as much like Sam Fisher as I could. Nick noticed the things I was doing and asked if I ever did parkour. A few weeks later, we went to a parkour gym and got trained in the basics of parkour. We started running around schools and playgrounds in a whole new way and started playing airsoft much differently. We never called it airsoft anymore, it was too much a combination of both. Airsoft parkour, we loved it, it was a blast. But let's talk more about Gage. It's almost the end of senior year and Gage is trying to get the girl he likes to go to prom with him. He's telling me that I have to go to prom as well. He wanted to double date, but firstly, I didn't have a date to prom, and secondly, I never intended on going. I always found the idea a waste of time, but I joked that if I was prom king, I'd totally go. He scoffed at me and said, "Whatever, I'll find someone else." A few weeks later, we're all taken to the gym for an announcement. All the students had chosen prom court, essentially the people that'd be running up for prom queen and king. I was extremely shocked when I heard my name was called. I got a free ticket to prom and told Gage that I would love to go. But who to go with? Well, as luck would have it, my best friend from elementary school, the one who yelled at me in middle school, she was one of the runners-up for prom queen. Even funnier enough, she asked me to go with her. I didn't actually win prom king, which was totally fine for me. I was just glad my ticket was free. Graduation rolls around and our field trip was to Six Flags. I loved it. When I get tired, I start to sing. I don't know why I do this, but the whole nighttime bus ride there, I was singing, and some people were submitting song requests for me, as the others were telling them to shut up. I was kind of the bus's iPod, which felt kind of cool. It was even funnier because on the way back from Six Flags, people were asking me to start singing again, which of course, I obliged. Graduation was over. I was officially out in the world, but I took a year off. I was going to get a job and go to college as soon as I could, but I wanted to do other things first. Primarily, I wanted to build myself a computer. Yes, the Xbox fanboy finally came around. My buddy Nick had shown me a game called Primal Carnage on Steam and told me that the only way to play it was through there. I was annoyed that I had to play it on PC, but impressed by the graphics. At the time, that was the only thing I cared about. We played the game all the time, but I told Nick that Primal Carnage was the only game I'd ever buy from Steam. Wasn't the case. Star Wars Battlefront 2, which had been my favorite game for a long time, was $2. I had never seen it for that price. I got it at GameStop for $20, so I knew I had to pick it up. Then I saw other games go on sale. Every day I'd pick them up. I'd play them with Nick on my laptop. And then summer vacation hit. The Steam Summer Sale. All of these amazing games that I'd never played went on sale, so I grabbed them all up. I must have spent so much money in just one day. I knew I had to build a PC. I got all my friends together and we set up a list and I built it. It was the most stressful and fun thing that I'd ever done, and I promised myself that I'd never do it again. I did love the feeling of turning all my settings up though, and I told my brother that he had to get a PC someday too. A few months went by and my best buddy Nick took off. See, he's Mormon, so after high school, he went on his mission. He went to Brazil for 2 years, and in that time, I emailed him every Monday on my shiny new PC and promised him that when he got back, we'd build a computer for him as well. But that is when tragedy struck. The worst time of my life hit and I came down with H. pylori. I've told this story before, but I started feeling pain in my chest before going to bed. I thought it was nothing, but it got worse and worse every night. I told myself that if it got worse again, I'd tell my mother. Well, it did. Every night the pain got worse by a factor of 2, so I told my mother what was going on. I didn't even think about it, but I was also tired more and I was losing a lot of weight. I went to my doctor multiple times as he tested for mono, some sort of influenza. He ended up telling me that I had esophagitis, which essentially meant that my esophagus lining was being eaten away by my stomach acid, and that is what was causing my pain, and what was probably causing my loss of weight, because it hurt to eat. However, it did not hurt to eat. I did lose my appetite, but I wasn't starving myself from pain. Regardless, I took the pills he prescribed and for a few weeks only got worse. I was in so much pain all the time, and my first girlfriend ever was no help, which was yet another story I've told before, but essentially she was telling me that I wouldn't spend time with her and that I was making up this pain in my chest so as not to hang out with her. Yeah, great gal. I finally got a new doctor who tested me for H. pylori. He didn't think that I would have it, but wanted to get the test out of the way. And to our surprise, I came back positive. Now, if you look up H. pylori, you'll find that it can do a lot of terrible things, the worst of which making your body eat itself, including muscle and fat, giving you esophagitis, which causes vicious heartburn. Then it will move on to stomach ulcers and potentially cancer. I was treated and turned out okay. The treatment, though, was worse than the disease itself, and I remember telling my mother that if I ever got H. pylori again, to let it just kill me. And yes, I could actually get it again. It definitely can come back because it actually never leaves your body and it kind of just lays dormant. It also destroyed my immune system for a very long time, and my metabolism is still twice as fast as it used to be, which was already pretty quick, so I eat a lot, and that sucks. But after I got better, I decided to put more effort into YouTube. Ironically, this meant starting a gaming channel. I had my friend Alec come over and play games with me online, and I did this for about a year. During that year, I was also doing plays at Camelot Theater. That was where I got the nickname Barrylicious Wonder Rod. I stayed with the theater for a few plays, but decided it was time to get a job, so I started at Walmart. More on that soon, though. During my year off school, I started hanging out with friends online. I met them through friends that I had that got into PC gaming at the same time that I did. It was so cool that I could play games with anyone around the world. And I know that seems small, but with how poor my family was, we could never afford to be able to do that before. Manny, Zach, Dakota, and myself would hang out all the time. They'd be featured in my gaming channel from time to time. I love all of them and still talk to Zach and Dakota as often as I can. Manny's too busy with school and such, but I'm sure he thinks about me sometimes. After the YouTube channel was not taking off, I realized that I wasn't being true to myself. I was pretending that I was Markiplier or PewDiePie, and I felt like I had so much more to offer than simple Let's Play videos. I wanted to tell stories again and talk about things that I was passionate about, so I deleted my first channel and renamed my gaming channel, which at the time was called Be a Widget Game, to Bulletbarry. I came up with that name first when I was 9, then used it again for my Xbox 360 gamer tag, then once more for my new channel. And I liked it. It was me. Not the name, of course, but the channel. It was who I was and what I thought, and people started liking it. I only had about 30 subscribers, but a few of them commented and I commented back. It was cool seeing that people liked my videos. It does, however, annoy me that even today you can still see my YouTube links say Be a Widget Game in them, but I guess it's kinda cool as well to be able to remember where I started. So the year ends, I stopped doing plays, and it's time to get a job. I started working for Walmart, which sucked, but I had to do it. See, my mother bought a house and needed help paying for it, so I couldn't just laze around anymore. Not that I was trying to be a freeloader, I actually really wanted a job. As I worked though, I stopped going to the meetings more and more. With all the plays and work, I never really had time to go, and honestly, I wasn't really feeling it anymore. I hadn't been for a long time. I told my family that I was going to stop going. My mother had known for a long time that my heart just wasn't in it. After I left, I started looking into other religions and beliefs. It wasn't until I accidentally stumbled upon a Christopher Hitchens debate that I became intrigued. I never really knew what atheists thought, but it seemed so straightforward. I really enjoyed them, and I guess I still do. Watching Christopher Hitchens debates, that is. I don't think myself an atheist, though. I'm still looking and learning and taking things in as I go, which honestly is really refreshing. I spent 10 months at Walmart before they screwed me over, so I quit and they screwed me over a second time. I hate Walmart and refuse to shop there. I started working at Fred Meyer in the apparel department, but I knew it was just a placeholder. Back at Walmart, I learned of this place called Falcon Northwest, and I made it my goal to work there one day. I kept telling myself that one day they would hire me. I must have gone in there at least every other week for months, all the while continuing my work at Fred Meyer, which I really enjoyed, to be honest. One day, my friend Nick, who had gotten back from his mission and actually worked with me at Walmart for a few months, told me that he knew someone who worked at Falcon. A friend who went to his church. I was very eager to meet him and hoped that it would help me get a foot in the door. The guy's name was Mitchell. He's also the guy who got me into VR, as he has an HTC Vive. I made my video on VR because I had Mitchell's help, but I asked him if he knew of any positions opening at Falcon Northwest, to which he replied, yeah, in about 2 weeks, there will be one. I'm quitting. He'd gotten a better job at Lithia, which was amazing news to me. 2 weeks passed and I put my resume in at Falcon again. They called me back, interviewed me twice, and offered me the job. I couldn't have been happier. I spent 10 months working at Falcon Northwest, building over 1,000 computers and loving every minute of it. When I started at Falcon, I had 1,000 subscribers. Just 10 months later, and here I am. 100,000 subscribers. This, of course, isn't all the stories I have. I just kind of scratched the surface of a few, but this has been my life so far. I had such a bad feeling that I'd work at Walmart my whole life. I was stuck in a horrible rut. Couldn't go to school because I had no money, couldn't save money because of my house and car payment, and couldn't pay those off because I was broke. But this YouTube channel has done so much to help me, and all of you who watch as well. It truly means so much to me that you guys have stuck around and enjoyed the content today. By the way, for those of you who've been waiting all this time for a face reveal, well, go follow me on Instagram. Bye everybody.